watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and this is a show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. Now, you might notice today 2 of us are without jackets. 1 of us still has a jacket, but it's a lovely hot day outside. But nevertheless, we're going to spend it in here in the studio this morning answering your questions. And joining me is Richard Murray, CEO of Eurolink Software. Welcome back, Richard.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good to see you. And joining us for the second time is Stephe Smith, Chairman of Greenfield Mortgages.
Great to be here.
Ex-founder of Poundland.
Yes.
That must have been quite an experience, Steve.
Oh yeah, amazing. They were from a market store idea of throwing things in a cardboard box and selling for 10p to a £1 billion company. It's amazing, really.
Well done.
What
an amazing feat. And very good. You know, we were talking before the show, just very good to hear that you've invested some of that money into the mortgage business to help people that are not always praised with the ease of getting a mortgage. Let me put it that way. So I think that's very commendable and very good. And
Thank you.
We'll certainly do all we can to encourage you here on Property TV.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's get on with the questions. And Richard, you're first. If my company decides to introduce a totally software-based system for the purpose of rental management, does this have any consequences in terms of data protection? And are there any other measures required to secure the data other than just buying the software?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything changed in 2018, didn't it? With GDPR, massive changes. I mean, Steve, with you know, big brand must have been a huge challenge for you guys and every other big brand out there. However, fines are relative, aren't they? And no matter what size of business,
there's no upper limit to the fine.
Absolutely, yeah. But whether you're a very large organisation and household name, or a small estate agency, and you mentioned lettings as well. It's obviously it was a huge change and something that needed to be dealt with. Putting in software, yeah, that's not the end of the process. Putting in the right software is important, obviously, and you've got sort of the principles of GDPR. So you've got the first one with privacy by design. So the software would need to be, obviously, it needs to comply with all the legislation. But if you're using express consent, for example, as the reason, which most estate agents would, you need to make sure that you register that is the case, and when you obtained that express consent to hold the person's data.
How broad is that express consent? I mean, is it we can do anything with your data, or your data will not be shared? Or
no, you'd always have a privacy statement. That privacy statement would be published on your website, and but again, just the fundamentals of the most important part of the box flashing up in front of the user.
Yeah.
To make sure that they ask for that express consent and make sure that it is given and make sure that it is recorded. And what we did, our approach was you couldn't do anything until you'd done that. So if you were trying to enter data, the data entry is obviously a big part of the agency world. They're constantly gathering data from applicants, prospects, vendors, landlords.
So just for the benefit of our viewers that are not so conversant with sort of digital processes, are you saying that the sort of system would act a little bit like those boxes we get when it says we put cookies onto your screen?
That's the same thing, it's consent.
And it won't let you go anywhere until you've said, okay, that's okay.
Correct.
That's
it's the same principle. Okay. It's giving consent, albeit you're obtaining consent in that particular instance. So the key thing is making sure that your systems are in, they're compliant with the legislation, they're up to date with the legislation because there's been some recent changes. But that pop-up box that you're familiar with from the cookie example, it's the same principle. So if a user has to make sure they gain that consent before entering the data, then at least it gives the agency every chance of getting things right, and there's a record of it.
So the system helps them to do that.
Absolutely, it makes them do it. It's mandatory. Yeah.
And if anything did happen in the future, at least you can show you've got a system to try and limit anything going wrong.
Absolutely, yeah. You can go back and say, well, obviously that can be argued, but there's an audit trail.
Is there any, perhaps being a bit old-fashioned here, is there a sort of a sort of software kite mark that says, you know, this is approved software, this does comply?
No,
How do you know?
Not that I'm aware of, but
I mean, if you're selling me software, you're going to tell me it does comply, but I mean, I don't know, do I?
well, yeah, and I'm sure down the line you'd be seeing me in court as well if it didn't.
Right, okay.
But obviously we get a set of guidelines, we look at the legislation, we interpret the legislation, and we deliver against that. And as I said, there's a number of principles. So by design, if we get the design right, which we have done, then we've completed that first principle. Second principle would be that sort of right to access. So you need to be able to access what data a company has on you. So again, making sure that the software can produce a report for the consumer to be able to say, this is the data we're holding for you. That has to be in a what's called machine readable format. For the rest of us, that means in an Excel spreadsheet. It needs to come out in a format that has some sort of order to it, let's say. But machine readable format must come out, and then you can give that to the individual. They then have the fourth principle is the right to be forgotten. Now that's fine, that's no problem. But when you're dealing with lettings, you've got lots of financial information that you will have to retain.
Yes.
There's other information other than the personal data. And what most systems like ours would do would allow you to be forgotten, and that data is not deleted, it's anonymized. So it's completely anonymized, but you can then retain the integrity of the client accounting system. So for all the other legislation that goes around accounting, it helps cover that as
so
well.
it's all secured on your system.
Yes, yeah.
Looks like the days of the Rolodex are over.
Anyway. They are, Stephen. However, the principles remain.
And the contact book's on the desk.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Steve, let's have your first question.
Okay.
And this is a question that we're asked a lot by viewers at the moment, and it's simply this, that when the COVID was at its height, obviously people were starting to get in trouble with mortgages and financial issues, and I think it was presumed that to some extent, well, that's all in the past. But actually, I think the fact of the matter is that those problems are coming to light now rather than then.
Yes.
And the question is quite an interesting one, because our viewer says, are there still any opportunities to help with the mortgage now that we're hopefully out of the grip of COVID? I read that there was help available last year, but that has now been set aside. I am belatedly suffering financial difficulties due to the extended time I had off during COVID from work at the peak of the pandemic.
Yes.
Any advice would be appreciated. Now, I know this is going to be rather limited, Steve, but...
Well, yeah, I suppose there's no easy way of answering this other than there's not much help at the moment out there for people to go forward. My advice would be, you know, if you are in financial difficulties, then there's a lot of brokers and advisors that you could sit down with that advise you and try and help you to get out the current situation you're in by showing you what you need to do to be able to be mortgageable and then apply for the mortgage.
Okay. So really, I think your advice is that if you're proactive, there are ports of call that you can make to guide you through these things. Now, I'm just taking as an inference from what you're saying that perhaps, for instance, very important to identify exactly why you're in the trouble you're in.
Exactly.
And what the way out of that is.
A bit like me with Poundland. If I took no, this concept never worked, Poundland wouldn't be here today. So don't take no for an answer. Talk to as many people as you can. And people that have been there and done it, and try and get advice from them and try and work out what the situation is, what do you need to do to get your credit up. Some of the companies these days you can register and these companies help for your credit to get up. But the quicker you understand where it's all going wrong, the quicker you can get back on the ladder, really.
Okay. Now, whether you go to your lender directly or whether you go through perhaps one of these agencies that are there to help, you're controlling a mortgage brokerage. What are you finding the attitude of the actual lenders is to these problems? Is it helpful? Is it negative?
If you think back to where banks used to lend almost 100% mortgages, and I used to have a lot of people from banks and building societies that says, Steve, we're scared of going to the bank or back to the office today to see how many keys are in the letterboxes. They are very cautious on what they lend, and if you think that banks or builders don't want to take the property back, they just want to know that you can afford to pay your mortgage
at some point. Yeah.
Simple. And again, with all these laws, people these days, you have a duty to make sure people affordability, that can afford what you are selling to them. So there's a lot of red tape these days, which make it difficult. But there is a lot of people out there that are willing to help.
Right, okay, well, we're running out of time for part one, but I think, Steve, if you don't mind, I'm going to come back to you on that point when we come back after the break. So there we are. We're going to go to a break now, so join me again after break when we'll be asking Richard and Steve more of your questions.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome back to part two of Property Question Time. I'm joined by Richard Murray and Steve Smith, so welcome back, guys. And Steve, we were just on the topic of mortgage and difficulties and everything else. Something else I want to question you on. One was the point, well, yes, talk to your lender, whether it be through an agency or yourself. I think communication is absolutely key in these situations. It's no good burying your head in the sand. But I think the one thing that I would say there is that no lender, as far as I've ever seen, wants to take your property back, wants to repossess. They're not in that business. They've lent you the money, you've done a deal, it's a hoped for long-term relationship. I think that's the ethos.
It is, and the marketplace these days, especially now, is making sure that if people are going to take a mortgage or a financial money from a company, to make sure they can afford to pay you back. Nobody wants to see people get into debt.
Okay, now that's exactly the point I'm just going to test you on now. Okay. It was announced about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago that the government, via the Bank of England, are going to now discourage stress tests for potential borrowers. What do you think to that? I think it's absolute lunacy, to be honest.
I think people, the agents and that have got licenses to make sure, and that's the way they've been trained, to make sure that people do not get in debt. To make it, I don't know, there will be more people getting into debt.
Clarity of information, isn't it? I think the explanation of what you're actually signing up to is far superior to what it used to be.
Yes.
And you actually understand that if the interest rates change, this is what it will cost per month. And it could be a frightening figure.
It could.
But I think it makes the consumer think a lot more.
And some if it's on the boards, we all know interest rates going up. And
but why would they take this obligation away?
Well, it'll take us back to 2008 potentially, but hopefully not.
100% mortgage. Here we go.
The government want to keep the property market going, but at the end of the day, there's not enough new property being built.
Well, America found out that the fastest way to get in trouble is to encourage the property market beyond its normal scope, when they were just packaging portfolios of debt and selling it off, and those portfolios were made up of anybody they could persuade to take money.
And if I'm honest, customers look at how much rent they're paying, and they look at how much a mortgage is cheaper. But it's not just about buying a property. You've got to be able to maintain that property as well. And people forget about that.
The costs.
They do. All right. Okay. Well, on with part 2 of the show. Thank you for that, Steve. I'm currently trying to evaluate which software packages are most suited and can be trusted to replace my accounts and management systems in an estate agency. All the companies seem to promise ease of installation and professional backup, but how do I know? Do I have to wait and find out the hard way?
Well, no, hopefully not, is the short answer. But my advice would be, when you're going through the procurement process, make sure that you do your research, which might sound like a an obvious one, but do your research. Make sure that the software is right for your agency, for your business. I would also question why are you changing, which might seem a strange question coming from a person who operates a software house.
You should be glad.
But it's got to be for the right reasons.
Yes.
I always think we need to challenge people on why are you changing? What are you trying to achieve? So what I would recommend is going through a kind of an as-is and a to-be process. So if you do like a business analysis, if you like, and say, well, as-is, what are we doing now? How are we doing it now? How do we want to do things? What are we trying to achieve?
Perhaps what the weak spots are.
Yeah, what the weak spots are. What, do we want to scale? What do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? Why are we changing? That's the challenge, really. I would put back to
that's
to
where
this
you can
type
help.
of agency.
That's where you can help.
Yeah, and it's a consultative sell. This is not. We're not selling double glazing here.
Because when customers coming back to you say, "Oh, I bought this system, it doesn't do what I want it to do."
It's the worst case scenario, Steve, and it usually happens in the early stages. So before you've really built your relationship, you're on the back foot. That doesn't help either party. So research is key. I would also say bring in your key decision makers. The earlier buy-in you get, we were talking off camera earlier about staff and making sure they're involved in the process, because then you get the buy-in early.
If the staff are involved, then you've cracked it.
Let your key decision makers, let your heads of department, let them make the decision, because it will help you on the implementation side. I just think really, I think that my best advice would be after doing your research, whoever you think is the right company for you, ask for some references. Ask for some references that are comparable to you as a business. Even better, ask for references that are comparable and are using your current systems, because then you can question data migration. What was the process like? Where did you fit it into your calendar year? How long did it actually take? Because the sales guy's saying it'll be done and dusted in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, it might be 16, but again, the research side, extend that to references. And again, most companies will be able to provide suitable references that are comparable. Otherwise, you're probably trying to procure the wrong software for your business. So yeah, lots of research, get your key people involved, get early buy-in, would be my best piece of advice.
Just tell me, when we've discussed this before, Richard, you've mentioned going to exhibitions and seeing the software working. Would you get a good idea of the overall sort of practicality of the software at an exhibition? Can you reproduce the...
No, not at all, but you'll get to meet the people. You'll get to see a snapshot of the software. You'll get to talk to the companies, because we're all there to get across, what we're about, what we're trying to achieve, what our sort of mission is, if you like. And all you'll do at that stage is maybe get a short list of 3 or 4 who you happen to click with or like what you were hearing, and then take those 4 away, book the viewings. Book the demos in, the demos meetings in.
Involve your staff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Involve those key decision makers in those demo meetings. Don't do them back to back. Build a questionnaire and fill a questionnaire out, each of you who are in that meeting, for each of the software packages. Because if you try and do 4 demo meetings on a Friday at the month end, it's not going to help your business. Well, they'll all merge into one.
Well, I was just going to say, it's a bit like looking at properties. If you look at too many, they all start to look the same, don't they?
Yeah, it can be like that. Yeah. So just have a sensible procurement process. But I think exhibitions online or in person are a good start point. Yeah.
Can I just ask you, from the point of saying, yes, okay, you're going to take a particular software on, and you have somebody come down, install it, and make sure you've got the right hardware or whatever you need. How much of then is the contact between a company like yours and the client in terms of physical presence, or is most of that done online, again through Zoom calls and that sort of thing?
Obviously, there was the sort of post-pandemic, we're very much getting back to boots on the ground, because we are told, and actually we can see it in our support tickets and the type of support tickets that are coming through, that actually the retention through online is not as good as face-to-face. We have our own training room, so clients can come to us. We can go to them. But I like the face-to-face aspect. I know our competitors are going a different way.
Well,
I like that. I like to have that face-to-face element.
The reason I asked that question is because I was just wondering whether the geographical location of your software company or your provider is important. So, for instance, if we were here in London, how important is it to have a London-based company? If you're in Manchester, how important to be in Manchester? Is there an optimum?
I think you really get the right software house first and foremost, and then if you have to maybe take on some overnight expenses to have that face-to-face, then it's money well spent. I think. I mean, you've implemented software. What would you agree?
Oh yeah, I used to go to all the shows, look at everybody's software, but it comes down to the person you're working with, that software company, and knowing that, listening to you. Well, it's great, but how about this? And these guys take on the what you tell them. And
well, that's actually how we develop our product, by listening to our clients, listening to our users. They I would say, the vast majority of our update content is recommendations or suggestions from users.
And it's exciting if you involve your staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
everyone gets on board.
I always encourage that. I always encourage that. Yeah.
Number one thing, I think.
Okay, very good. Steve, your last question of the show, and you're going to have to get your crystal ball out for this.
Okay.
We all know that interest rates are currently rising, and this is the main way to try and stem inflation. How long do the panel think this trend will last for, and to what level do they think the base rate will rise in the next year or so? I mean, I will tell you, I can remember sitting in a developer's office listening to it going to 15% and thinking, oh dear.
Well, if you think now the base rate is 1.25, and in the last 12 months, I think it's gone 4 or 5 times it's increased. And where mortgages 12 months ago was about just over 1.5%, which is really low in my opinion. And now them just over 3%. So a lot of people complain, mortgage rates have gone up to almost just over 3% now. You've only got to think back to 2006, 2007, where people was paying 5 or 6% for a mortgage. So it's
pretty
still
standard, wasn't it?
It's still very standard, and we are doing a lot of quotes at the moment because if you have a mortgage offer, it's fixed depending on your circumstance up to 6 months. So you fix the rate, which is really good. A lot of banks at the moment are offering savings to their customers. A few banks now are offering up to 2.5%. For me, that is an indication if people are offering more money to the savers, because a lot of these people lend the money for the mortgages, rates are definitely going to go up. And I can see, or predicting that in the next 10 to 12 months, mortgage is going to go another 1%, in our opinion.
And do you think the trend will continue after that? Or do you think it will come down, or do you think it'll just remain pretty stable?
It's very hard to predict after 12 months. As I said, with 5 or 6%, it depends how the market goes. It depends if the government also, we are short of properties in the UK. So if they push more houses being built, because that's controlling the high prices at this moment in time. The banks are offering more, and I can see them going above 1%.
Okay. And do you think these rises that we're having at the moment are in fact a good tool to battle inflation? Or do you think all those inflationary measures are really outside of this country and outside of our control?
God, there's so many things going on at this moment in time, and inflation 10, 11%. It's like, oh God. But property has a big factor to do with that, and obviously.
But again, they're saying on food it's a lot more than that, isn't it? It's a lot higher than 10 or 11%. So I think it's a bit hard to judge. I think we probably need to spend some time thinking about how we measure these figures and what we do about them. And I just don't feel that the government over this last 12 months has really focused on the real issues.
Yeah, me too, with everything going on, and a lot of the products, with Poundland, a lot of products come from the Far East, and what you're doing, you are buying in dollars. Now the dollar rate at the moment is about 120, 121. Because you are forward buying, And if they predicting it's going down, you have to buy at 116, 117.
Yeah.
So it's making the products a lot more money. And where we used to spend £2,000 on the container, it's now £20,000 on transport, because look at fuel, almost £2 a litre.
Yes.
God, in my lifetime, I've never known it so high.
No.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, though. Is that it's the supply problem.
It's a supply problem.
I don't think as a country, I think I'd be right in saying we've never hit a house building target.
No.
That I'm aware of, certainly in the last decade. And there's been lots of, I mean, we have a new housing minister every 3 weeks, of course. Well, they set their stall out. We just don't, we can't work it out.
We looked at this last week, Richard, and we've had 19 in 10 years.
There you go.
19 housing. How on earth do you get consistent policy? And I'm going to say on this programme again, when the government come out and say, we're going to build 250,000 houses, who's we? That's my question. Who's we?
Exactly.
I think you should go for it, Stephen.
Do you?
You should be the next housing minister.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't last very long. I'd be fired before I start, I'm sure. Okay, well, there we are. That's all we've got time for this show. So a huge thank you to Steve Smith. Thank you, Steve, for coming down. And Richard, thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Both of you have given great answers and very helpful answers too. So there we are. That's all for today. So join me again next time on Property Question Time. So from me, Stephen Galpin, see you next time.